Hi and welcome to Better Your Chess. Welcome to Supporter Game Analysis. My name is Waldemar Moes. Supporter of the day is Pirc. Thank you, Pirc, for sending in your game. We're going to take a look at the club competition game that was played last Friday at Chaturanga Chess Club between Jasper with the white pieces and Pirc with the black pieces. Again, we're going to try and make some sense of the moves that Stockfish considers inaccurate, wrong or very wrong. Okay, here we go. Jasper opened with e4. That's his favorite move, I think. And Pirc answered with d6. He really likes to play these hybrid Pirc, King's Indian, modern defense type positions. d4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7 and f4. Okay, now this can transpose into the so-called Austrian attack when we have a Pirc defense proper with knight f6 and then knight f3, etc. Okay, but in this game Pirc plays a little bit differently, and according to Stockfish he plays the first inaccurate move. Now it's of course very well possible that Pirc plays this move on purpose, right? Accurate or not, but let's try and figure out why this move may be considered inaccurate by Stockfish. If you play the Pirc, or if you play the modern defense, or if you play the King's Indian defense, it's basically like a guerrilla type of defense. You say to white, okay, form your broad pawn center and then later on I will try and attack it. And if there is a good attacking move to play against these broad pawn centers, it's either with e5, which is more a King's Indian type of move, or with c5, which is a very typical move in these Pirc structures. So if black refrains from playing such moves and he plays a more slow move like c6, then you can start to wonder if he finally will get his fair share of the center, which is what you're supposed to do in the opening phase, right? So it's a bit of a timid, it's a bit of a tame, it's a bit of a waiting move, and maybe not quite in the guerrilla frame of mind. Of course, there is maybe another idea behind c6, and that is that the queen gets opened up, right? The queen could now potentially go to b6, but from b6 it is not really hitting any targets, especially not if white just simply decides to keep his bishop on c1 for the moment. And even if the bishop moves and the queen takes on b2, then more often than not this pawn turns out to be a so-called poisoned pawn. So I'm not sure that this queen b6 move really adds to black's position. And then last but not least, one of the ideas of c6 is sometimes that you can also play d6, d5. But if you want to play d6, d5, then why do it in two moves? Why not try and play it in one go, right? So those are some reasons. Obviously, I'd like to say why Stockfish consider this move an inaccurate move. So Jasper continues with healthy development. Knight f6 is also looking quite normal here, and bishop d3 overprotecting the e4 pawn. It's very good to defend that bishop towards the center. Now castles is played and castles is played, and queen c7. I have noticed that Pirc really likes to put his queen on c7, and I suppose this is also because he wants to support maybe a later e7, e5 push. Okay, but again, Stockfish considers this move to be slightly inaccurate. Maybe because you're moving the queen instead of a minor piece, right? We're always supposed to defend knights before bishops and then bishops before queens and so on. And in the long run, the queen might also be vulnerable to knight jumps, right? Of course, for the moment not, because this pawn is quite safely guarding those jumping squares. But you never know, if the c pawn is forced to move, then maybe knight b5 or d5 could later on hit the queen. Another question we can ask ourselves, is e7, e5 a viable move for the moment? For instance, is he threatening to play that? If we make a nothing move, then we could consider e5, of course. But, I mean, we can count, right? We all went to school, I suppose. I can take once, you can recapture, and then I can also take with the pawn. But if I take with the pawn, then maybe knight g4 makes a lot of sense, and black is going to regain this pawn, and he will have a very strong square and play against his isolated pawn. But of course, white does not take like that. White will take like that, and well, I think that basically he's just winning the game. So after queen c7 and some move by white, black would still not be threatening to play e5, but of course he can prepare that with knight b d7. But it all looks again rather slow. But now let's see how Jasper is maybe making use of the opportunity that is given. He can play, of course, a development move. With the bishop, looks like a normal move. I'm also wondering if he can't just kick the knight, right? Something like this. And then black will never be able to play e7, e5 himself. And he's also creating this outpost square here. For the moment, the knight could still jump here. You don't really want to exchange those knights, I think. Even though the computer suggests that this is really quite a good continuation for white. Yeah, this looks really very healthy, right? How are you going to break down this huge pawn chain? This is one way to play for white and have an advantage. I suppose that later on he could play for the f4, f5 break and enjoy the advantage. Yeah. But he didn't play this. He played a rather mysterious move. He plays here king h1. And he is sort of giving back time to black. Would you do that? Stockfish doesn't consider it inaccurate, but, well, I have my doubts. I have my doubts if this would be such a good move. Anyways, knight b to d7 is played, and now I think black's plan is becoming clear. e4, e5 he wants to play. But now Jasper seizes the opportunity. Now he does play this. And yeah, he's hitting the knight on f6. And he's building this strong pawn wedge in the center. This is, I think, how you're supposed to play against the Pirc if you are given the opportunity. Yeah. Now what I'm also not so sure about is that Piotr now takes on e5. Stockfish doesn't mind, funnily enough, but right now, you guys cannot see that, but I can. He's giving an evaluation of no less than plus 2.4. But after taking, he just showed plus 3.5, but he has adjusted that to only, no, yeah, here it is, plus 3.4. So Stockfish does mind that you take. But again, without getting too concrete, why would you refrain from taking here? Well, it allows white to recapture with the f-pawn, thereby opening up the f-file for the rook, gaining more activity for the white pieces. So instead of that, I think you're supposed to maintain the tension and just find a rather decent square for the knight. And probably the most decent square, ugly it looks, would be knight e8. At least the rook on f1 would not have an open file, and let's not forget, the bishop would not have an open diagonal, right? And now it's difficult for white to push this pawn or to push that pawn, because there is, let's be honest, there is a lot of pressure here on the e5 square. Of course, white would just continue his build-up behind this pawn wedge and not push his pawns too quickly, and only try and look for some sort of a breakthrough once his army is entirely ready for the opening up of the position. Okay, but yeah, knight bd7 considered inaccurate because Jasper now really pushes this knight and takes away black's possibility of playing e5 himself. So this move can be considered inaccurate. F takes e5 makes a lot of sense. And now already, even though Stockfish again seems to adjust his evaluation, white is already, yeah, according to Stockfish again, it is plus 3.5. White is winning. White is just winning. Incredible. And that happens just within a span of 10 moves where black has played not really in the spirit of the pitch. He has tried to play this counter-attacking defense, but has also played it or treated it a little bit too passively, I want to say. Yeah, okay. Now, my first instinct would be to play knight e4, because if you have space advantage, then you don't want to exchange pieces. And this is also what Jasper plays. He plays knight e4. But according to Stockfish, it's a mistake. And again, up to me to try and figure out why this is a mistake. Sometimes it's a mistake because you allow your opponent to hurt you, or the other way around, you miss an opportunity. Of course, knight takes e4 is a maneuver, and therefore not very high up in the hierarchy. We play the maneuver in order to attack, in order to take a piece. And here it was already possible for white to actually take something and therefore play a much more forcing move. Of course, there is this abstract idea that you don't want to exchange pieces, but if you can release some sort of a stress test on the opponent's position, then you always look for forcing moves first. And we have to figure out what happens here. Black is forced to recapture, and with that knight out of the way and a move like knight g5, I think the threat may be sometimes knight h7 followed by queen h5, even though that doesn't seem to bring me much for the moment. But I think the main threat here is to play e5, e6 and really ruin all those light squares here on black's king side at the moment that white's pieces have much more scope on the black king side than black's pieces. And of course the culprits are sitting here, and those pieces are not ideal defenders of the king side. But let's ask Stockfish by typing in the X key if I'm right, if e5, e6 is indeed a threat here. He doesn't think it's the main threat. No, he doesn't think that. He thinks that there are also other attacking ideas that are very well known, for instance from the Grand Prix attack, right? You go here and then you go here, and then my gosh, you have everybody piling up here. And let's not forget there is this open F file. So since white has a lot more space, he also has the time to more quickly bring in his pieces to the critical area, which in this case is of course black's king side. Yeah, I mean, he can pile up on the F file, sometimes he can switch to the G or the H files. This is basically, if you don't want to play with E5, E6, which looks a little bit opportunistic, this is basically a ready-made attack if you know these Grand Prix attacking schemes, you know, with the queen going to E1 and H4, very, very typical, yeah. And black will never be in time to bring in sufficient defenders. There's also not a dangerous pawn break for black. Any pawn break he plays, well, basically the only remaining one he has now is of course a horribly weakening move of his own king side. And there is not a minority attack inside anytime soon, because white is just way too safe on the queen side. Besides, I'm attacking you on the king side, which is much more exciting, because that's where your king is, and I don't really care about my queen side. So it seems that this is really a pitch defense gone wrong for black. But Jasper did not play this, let's say, faster, more forcing move. He played this move, allowing probably some counterplay. And now, very well, even though slightly late, Piotr makes use of the opportunity given. He now does attack that center, yeah? So he's springing out of the bushes like a guerrilla, and he is putting renewed pressure on this center. Of course, with the flank pawn against the center pawn. And as always in these positions, there is piece pressure against e5. So Jasper tries to maintain this pressure. And I think now we see also why the capture is stronger. Let me just go back to that moment quickly. If we take here, then we force black's c-pawn to go to d5. And from d5, this pawn can wreak no havoc as it can in the game, because of course on d5 it's simply blocked, and as I said, there are no meaningful breaks for black in this position. Okay, so back to the game, where after c takes d4, c takes d4, excuse me, after c5, c3 was played to just try and maintain the grip on the center there. c d4, c d4. Now Piotr played again a somewhat slower move. There is a target, there is a target here for black to attack, and that is of course the move knight b4, hitting this bishop. If you can maybe force this bishop to go to b1, then you're really frustrating white's major pieces. The bishop cannot go to c2, of course, because then there it will be taken. If the bishop has to go to e2, then it's not so active anymore. It's frustrating the queen, and now this knight is loose. And if the bishop goes somewhere here, then you're also, I think, on the wrong trajectory, because then you can also take or chase that bishop. So knight b4 would really throw in a monkey wrench into white's position. So that's, I think, an opportunity miss. So this is an attacking move, right? But what does Piotr play? He plays one move lower in the hierarchy. He plays a maneuver. And even though this move makes perfect sense, the knights are on the same trajectory again. I'm looking at a move like b3, but b3 still allows knight b4. Yeah. So I think that somehow it's again a game of time. It's a game of time. Knight c4 is not really a threat, is it? Knight a4 is not really a threat. The most important move still in that line would always be knight b4. Yeah. Another advantage, or an advantage, of knight b6 is of course that now this bishop is opened up. It can either post up on f5 or on g4 and help in the defense of the king side, because it's a queen side piece that will be able to trade itself off for one of those potential attackers on the king side. But let's see how... Ah yeah, this is smart how Jasper plays. He plays now bishop d2. There were probably other moves, but he now simply stops knight b4. And therefore he maintains the integrity of his bishop's position on d3. And, hello, the queen turns out to be a target. Not to knight b5 or knight d5, as I pointed out earlier. But here the c file is open, so rook c1 can come in, and that can be of course a very useful tempo for white to bring his rook to the open file. So I think Jasper, even though he didn't seize the best opportunity with knight takes d5, is still firmly in control and is enjoying an advantage here. But okay, here comes the bishop, yeah, trying to involve itself in the game. Now this is also sort of pinning the knight on e4, because the bishop on d3 can be taken. It's loose. You don't really want to play a move like knight f2. That's silly. What still comes to mind is the move Queen e1, with the idea of potentially going to g3 or h4 and so on, and just try and continue attacking. Maybe you can just go here, I'm just envisaging something, and play the funnily looking g4, just asking that bishop where you're going, and once the bishop has moved, maybe you'll just want to follow up, or you want to follow up anyway with knight g5 once your queen is on h4, because then you cannot take anymore, because of course it would be checkmate. So the queen would be very well placed on h4, I think. But okay, apart from that, I'm digressing a little bit because I wanted to focus only on Stockfish's commentary. Rook c1 makes a lot of sense here, yeah? Now where does the queen go? If it goes to d7, then maybe it's interfering with the bishop on f5 if the bishop ever wants to retreat, so Pirc decides to go to d8. But of course, the queen is back to where it was in the starting position. Yeah, that cannot be considered ideal. So queen e2 is played now. Queen e2 also looks like a decent move, but maybe queen e1 was also interesting. Why not queen e1? I don't know. Rook c8. Yeah, rook c8, rook c8. Ah, okay. This is why Jasper played queen e2. And this is also maybe why it's very subtle, this chess, why queen e1 was stronger than rook c1. If you play queen e1 here, then you don't risk black neutralizing your rook on the c file. Because maybe you can use this rook later on the f file, and then you could continue with your attack, queen e1 to h5. But here he plays this move, and now he realizes that Pirc wants to play rook c8 to contest that c file, and he connects the rooks already, but he also doesn't want to exchange rooks, because now after rook c8 he plays knight c5. But the consequence is of course that now black can take this bishop, and probably he doesn't mind so much because he had this space disadvantage. He gets rid of this potentially dangerous bishop, and even though white is still clearly better, it feels like a bit of relief for black's position, much similar to the game I was discussing yesterday, where Simon was exchanging too many pieces against Case's pieces, and then it turned out that black got out on top after all the exchanges. So rook c7, that also makes sense, I suppose. It's not a mistake or an accuracy according to Stockfish, at least. And of course you need to do something about the b7 pawn, which is under attack from the knight on c5. But let's see how the game continues, huh? Yeah. For the moment, yeah, black's bishop may be better than white's bishop in the long run, even though white's bishop still remains some attacking potential. Queen e4. Yeah, that's a maneuver. That's a maneuver. I think he still wants to go to h4 and then attack h7 again with knight g5s and bishop h6s and so on. But why is it an inaccuracy? Maybe the maneuver is just too slow. There was another attacking plan, which Stockfish considers stronger. Now that the light squared bishops have been exchanged, those squares can become more vulnerable. And if you want to attack h3, well, you can also do it in one go from h3. You don't have to go via these two, which takes you one more tempo, huh? And again, I'm looking at this e5, e6 move. Let's ask Stockfish, what is the idea of knight g5? It's either e6 and or queen h3, I'm guessing. Queen h3 is the idea, and he says if white is now allowed to play queen h3, it's basically winning. Yeah, interesting, yeah. Okay, there is also another tactical idea. It may be this idea. to eliminate the defender of this square, and then sometimes crash through with knight e6. Of course, all that needs to be calculated, because there will be counterattacks with or without a check. Okay, but queen e4 was played, which is probably inaccurate then, yeah. So e6. Aha, okay, so he stops that idea, and I suppose this move fits in structurally with the dispersion of bishops and pawns. But of course it weakens this, and this square, huh? Can be important, yeah. Another important idea is, of course, that now the queen defends against queen h4. So that's also why queen e4 was one move too slow. By playing queen e4, Jasper gives Piotr this opportunity, which basically stops two ideas, this idea and this idea. So black's position, even though in theory, is looking up. Okay, so there is the obvious bishop g5, and those pieces are taking up more dangerous positions. But, black's pieces seem to be okay. The knight on b6 is not ideal, but the bishop on g7 and the knight on d5 are doing fine. And who knows, maybe there will be a doubling of the major pieces. Queen c8 is played now. Yeah, queen c8 is played now. Queen e8 was also there, maybe overprotecting f7. And there is maybe a counter-attacking idea, huh? Look at that. Trying to infiltrate white's position may also have been a very good idea. Stockfish seems to prefer queen e8, but let's go with the game. Queen c8 and queen h4 after all. Queen h4 after all, yeah. But is there an immediate threat? I think that it is important for black that as soon as, let's say, this knight appears on g5, that he can always play this move, huh? h7, h6. And the same holds true if we exchange those bishops and the king is, for instance, pulled towards g7. Then also after knight g5 there is h6. Then white would probably try and switch the attack to this square. But again, with a knight on f6 and a queen on h4 and those pawns and the king being the way it is, it's not a mating attack. Yeah, it's not a mating attack. Sometimes you have to take a look at these sudden moves, but there's also a counter play now in the c file. So, okay, white is better, but how to build? Huh? How to build this advantage? Yes, this is a good move. Trying to improve this knight from b6, which was far from ideal, and confronting the forward knight on c5. I think that's a good move. White doesn't want to exchange pieces, so he drops back and he really hones in on those dark squares now. Maybe also the d6 square. And here Piotr plays a slower move, b6. But why? I mean, you just chased the knight from c5. Why do you want to overprotect the c5 square? Why would you lose time? Stockfish doesn't like it. Stockfish suggests, by the way, a move that is extremely scary looking. He suggests that you should play f6, confront everybody, and stake your own claim to the dark squares. And this could lead, for instance, to wholesale exchanges, but wholesale exchanges that are not necessarily good for white. And both sides, let's not forget, have weak pawns here. And white would lose his space pawn, and there would be exchanges on the c file. This king would not be safe, because a check to the king is made, and a check to this king is not necessarily made. So I can understand that white's advantage would be deteriorating here. After f6, Stockfish suggests don't go for the wholesale exchanges and just play something like this. Try and maintain the initiative. But b6 feels a little bit weird. So Jasper now uses the fact that his rooks are connected and black's aren't. He's now really trying to take over the c-file, and he could have done so with rook c1. He could have done so with rook c1. Now we never know if the c-file is really going to be of use, because if you're attacking on the king side, you maybe want to maintain your rook on the f-file, where it may be more relevant, right? But this is still a decent looking position for white for sure. Let's not forget that you're putting pressure on the king side, but after a move like queen b7, which Stockfish is suggesting, you also have access to this square, and you're really creeping in the center, the c-file, the king side. Very importantly, you're stopping this rook from coming to c8, so your control of the c-file will last ever so longer. So this is more of a transboard strategy, but Jasper refrained from doing it, and apparently he plays his first blunder here. Knight f6 blunder. Again, the question is it because now our opponent can hurt us, or because we missed such an excellent opportunity with rook c1? And maybe a third possibility, it has the looks of that here in this game, is aren't we giving away too much of our advantage because we're exchanging pieces here? Now the funny thing is, according to the computer, you're supposed to play a move that a human being would never really play so quickly. You're supposed to play bishop takes. But we have to ask ourselves, why? Isn't this just incredibly dangerous? Let's say we recapture with the pawn, and the idea is obvious, right? We just want to go here, and let's ask the computer by typing in X. I mean, what on earth are we missing here? Oh, of course, queen h6 is not a threat. Queen h6 is not a threat, because the moment you would play queen h6, I would just simply take that pawn. Thank you very much. Aha, so that already goes to show that maybe knight f6 check isn't as strong as white would have hoped. Of course, if you recapture with the bishop, which is the other idea, then maybe we can take once. You take like this, and again queen h6 is not a threat. And there is access to this square. This one is weak. And maybe black's king is not so weak as you think. White has 3 pawn islands, and black only has 2. And there is play along the c-file, huh? And yeah, like I said, if you try this type of attack, then h6 or h5 is probably... h6 can be taken, of course. Now, so here you have to play this, yeah. And this type of breaking up move is probably way too dangerous, because hello, white's king is also in danger. So just a few lines to show why maybe this knight f6 is not so impressive. But let's continue just a little bit more with this implausible move. So then you're supposed to play e takes f6. And now h5. According to the computer, this gives black a tiny little edge. He has quite a nice fortress now. And after the g4 move, it's all very scary, of course. You can make use of this knight f4 square. You protect h5, but you also just prepare for a very nasty counterattack. But it takes, again, a good stomach to play like this with black, yeah? Difficult. And instead, very understandably, Piotr decides to take that knight with this knight. Yeah, the difference is now that, and again, it's so often it's about time, we hit the bishop on g7. So the bishop is forced to move, and maybe that's why white's position is still better than it would have been after bishop takes f6, but very difficult to judge. Okay, so now there is a square on e5, right? And well, white jumps in. But what is white's plan here? He will never be able to put a knight on d6 anymore. He will not be able to put a rook, likely, on the c file. We're going to see what happens there. But what's his attacking plan? Huh? Where is he going to deliver checkmate? So let's say it is still about this checkmating square. He might try this move. He might try this move. And then I'm just doing nothing, right? He might try this move. Then black will recapture. Then the queen can come in to threaten mate on g7. But if nothing else, by that time black has already the opportunity to make some 4 moves. If nothing else, black can always defend the mating square here with g7. If you would then play an attack like this to try and mate on h7, then by that time I'm pretty sure that you are mated yourself by black's remaining pieces here. Yeah. So I don't think that white still has a really dangerous attacking plan left on the king side. That's the problem. Yeah. Stockfish considers the position to be almost equal. And here already comes the counter attack. That queen is creeping up. It's sometimes preparing to post up defensively once this rook moves. The queen is looking at those vulnerable moves, pieces. The queen is looking here. This knight may come in sooner or later if these squares become available. Who knows, maybe the rook can also join in, and there are some back rank combinations. So, yeah, the fight is really becoming very tense. Here, Jasper plays a blunder. And I suppose the blunder is because he gives up the pawn on b2 without any clear compensation. But not just that, the rook is now not so well placed on the c file. It also means that f6 is weakened, and it looks weird because you attack the queen with tempo, but the queen moves and the rook basically now is a target to the queen. And that's not the only problem. The bishop is probably overworked because the bishop has to guard this pawn and the rook. So even though white wins a tempo for a very brief moment, after that he's a pawn down and in trouble. Because what do you play now? Well, he plays h3. And now all of a sudden he's lost. Because the bishop on g5 is overworked. It makes perfect sense to play h3 here, because you fear some accident on the back rank, right? Because for a brief moment Jasper didn't realize that there are too many targets in his position and that his bishop is overworked. So now the bishop jumps out. It had been in a cage, and I suppose that was where white's advantage was, yeah. But now this is just horrible. What are you doing about this? You're already a pawn down also. So any exchange is just really, really bad. If you take on f6, I take on c1 with check. I consolidate and win the game. So rook f1 was played. Yeah, it's probably one of the best moves. And now bishop takes g5 was played. Queen takes g5 was played. Queen takes d4 was played. There goes a second pawn. And white's position collapses, yeah. Knight g4. Some final tricks on the dark squares. But no, says Piotr. I'll just shut down all the counterplay, because now also my rook is controlling this square. And your rook is no longer controlling the square because my pawn is in the way. And of course the check on h6 is useless. It's just king g7 or something, and then, well, this is just a horrible position. Yeah. So Jasper had had enough, and after f5 he resigned the game. But I just briefly want to go back to this moment where after queen c2 he played rook c1, which was the beginning of his demise. But what are you supposed to play here? Well, the computer suggests maybe you can play h3 here and then give up this b pawn, but at least at the moment that the rook would not be under attack. And from here, difficult as it may be, you can still fight with queen e4, he says. But what's the idea of queen e4? Maybe the idea of queen e4 is that you want to sacrifice and then maybe take here. It's not clear. Let's ask the computer. X. Okay, that's weird. You just played h3 and then you want to go h4. Well, okay, maybe you can still rip up Black's king side with this type of play. And it could be very dangerous. Yeah, it could be very dangerous. Anyway, that was the way to resist. Rook c1 was too much. Yeah. Okay. Well, I suppose that's it for this supported game analysis. Congratulations to Piotr for winning the game. You know the drill. If you've come this far, please subscribe to the video, smash that like button, and comment on the game below. Do you also want your game analyzed? Then go to the description below the video and read all the necessary information. Thanks for your attention. See you in the next video, and hey, don't forget, better your chess.